good structures. That we have a few indigenous entrepreneurs focusing on tourism, but they are not so good connected, and they can't offer enough seats and places, so they cannot maybe always accept if a big bus are stopping by with 40 visitors, etc. So this is a very good idea. I believe it's Circumpolar. It's very, very good to focus on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. John?
Yes, I was thinking about what Chris had to say about how do you, going forward, and how do you make sure that the leadership that everything is instigated by the leaders and initiated by the leaders. And as I mentioned this morning, I think it's all about decisions, because we could have decided altogether not to go into the tourism industry, but we got an expert that we felt comfortable in working with to help us learn about the industry, because we had no idea as to how it worked. It's quite the bureaucracy of tourism and how it works. It's really interesting how, inbound operators, destination marketing organizations, it's a real complex structure to get involved, to bring people to visit you. And we had no idea, but I think it was because the leaders said that, how can we stop this exploitation? Because, and we turned it around and actually made it a benefit for us. And it was because we were able to make an informed decision. And I think I want to keep coming back to that. If there's and making an informed decision is looking at ways to do things from, we learned from other eco tour operators, what they did. But these kinds of forums help us to share some of those leading practices. So that's why I'm a strong proponent of what we're doing here in looking at leading practices.
Thank you. Can we move on to an example either from the Sami region or from Colombia?
Buenas tardes para todos y todas. Yo soy María Teresa Ramírez del Departamento Nacional de Planeación. Y oyendo a las experiencias de los compañeros que me han precedido, quisiera llamar la reflexión sobre algo. En términos de derechos reconocidos, Colombia, valga la redundancia, es conocida como uno de los países que más derechos ha reconocido a los pueblos indígenas. Derechos que van desde lo individual hasta lo colectivo. Y allí quisiera, digamos, como hacer un acento de lo que pasa en la reflexión frente al desarrollo de proyectos de vinculación al desarrollo económico de los pueblos indígenas. Porque para Colombia los resguardos indígenas hoy, que son las tierras que se les reconocen por titulación colectiva, están en tránsito, por lo menos desde la Constitución, hacia ser entidades territoriales. Y eso marca una diferencia, porque orienta también como cuál debe ser la manera de fortalecer esa gobernanza de cada una de las comunidades en su territorio. Hoy, a los resguardos indígenas se les reconoce el derecho a la libre determinación, el derecho al gobierno propio. Todos son aspectos que a la hora de formular un proyecto de desarrollo económico, pues hay que tenerlo en cuenta. Pero además es cómo favorece ese proyecto al buen vivir, al mejoramiento de las condiciones de vida de las comunidades que están dentro de ese territorio. El territorio es el principal capital, digamos. La tierra vinculada a ese territorio, los recursos que hay en ese territorio, el capital cultural, son los principales bienes, digamos, que tienen las comunidades para promover ese desarrollo. Y no es una generalidad, digamos. En Colombia hay hoy 804 resguardos constituidos. Fuera de los que, digamos, están haciendo tránsito para o de territorios de ocupación ancestral que están protegidos por la norma. Entonces, cada territorio es una unidad, digamos. Cada territorio tiene unas circunstancias particulares, tiene unas formas organizativas, unas formas de gobierno propio, que deben ser, como decían mis compañeros, las que se consideren a la hora de formular propuestas de desarrollo. Colombia tiene experiencia, digamos, a nivel internacional es bastante conocido ya como una experiencia empresarial. Las IPS indígenas, que son instituciones prestadoras de servicios de salud, que están en el marco de la ley que reglamenta la prestación de servicios de salud en Colombia. Hay varias empresas indígenas que se han dedicado, digamos, a prestar los servicios a los miembros de los territorios indígenas en las que se ubican. Esas, si bien, digamos, han sido señaladas como una prueba exitosa, lo cierto hoy es que muchas de ellas están en una situación financiera complicada y no tendría que entrar pues, a revisar con detalle qué es lo que ha hecho que hoy no podamos decir que el modelo es tan exitoso. Tenemos desde el Ministerio de Comercio y Turismo una línea, un programa específico desde un grupo que se llama Inclusión Social, para comunidades indígenas. Hay, digamos, diferentes criterios de selección de las comunidades participantes, pero más que comunidades son como proyectos, como iniciativas, ¿no? Son emprendimientos e iniciativas que estaban ya con un grado de consolidación. Esos criterios para identificar las iniciativas a vincularse que se pasan por lo que ha sido la historia, digamos, de nuestro país, por criterios como estar dentro de la sentencia T025, que muy técnico termina siendo el pronunciamiento que hizo la Corte Constitucional sobre el estado de cosas inconstitucionales en Colombia frente a las víctimas, y en la que se identificó que la población étnica del país es la más víctima entre las víctimas, eso se puede decir, ¿no es cierto? Son doblemente victimizadas, ¿verdad? Doblemente victimizadas por su condición de pertenencia étnica, de todo lo que es. Entonces, esos han sido los criterios de selección, los planes de salvaguardia que allí se establecen, los planes de acción de reparación colectiva. En el marco de esos proyectos priorizados, la primera aproximación obviamente es reconocer que hay unas autoridades propias en esos territorios y que hay un acercamiento en el marco del respeto, digamos, y ese diálogo que tiene que ser también ascendente cultural a una posición, digamos, desde gobierno. Se construye con las comunidades, los planes de acción, y ellos mismos se hace un diagnóstico con ellos, con metodologías participativas, y además se identifican cuáles son las necesidades específicas de asistencia técnica, de fortalecimiento organizativo, de generación de marcas, de mejoramiento de canales de comercialización y de promoción incluso de sus productos. Digamos que para el caso colombiano es re clave lo que también nos decía Rogelio hace un rato, y es partir del reconocimiento del derecho al desarrollo propio. Todas las comunidades de un territorio son las que deben establecer cuáles son sus objetivos de desarrollo a largo plazo. Y en el caso de las comunidades a las que pertenecen tanto Rogelio y Luzmari, pues los mayores han tenido un papel muy importante porque son los que han dado los lineamientos de hacia dónde se debe, o las consideraciones que se deben tener para ese desarrollo de su vinculación al mercado. Pues yo creo que como lecciones aprendidas tenemos todavía por explorar las particularidades de las economías tradicionales. Las economías tradicionales indígenas son economías multisectoriales, digamos, ¿no? Depende no solo de ciclos anuales, sino también de dónde ubican fuentes y potenciales vinculaciones a mercado. Entonces, todo el tiempo se están moviendo y adaptando de acuerdo a esas circunstancias. Entender esa lógica es, yo creo que es todavía un vacío y Lo otro es, digamos, cómo los conceptos económicos que tenemos desde la sociedad occidental se transforman o se expresan de otra manera. El tema del ahorro se expresa de manera muy diferente en la economía tradicional. El tema de las reglas sociales, digamos, de cómo debería ser la distribución de ingresos o el control sobre un mayor número de ingresos, pues también tiene implicaciones. Para el caso de la Amazonía se habla mucho del impacto del dinero, de circulante dentro de las economías tradicionales, y por lo tanto debería ser un aspecto a considerar. Por lo tanto,
Gracias. Maria Teresa. Are there any questions or comments? Maria Teresa.
Just a comment is that the board that I represent, the National Economic Development Board, has done some work on, and it's on our website, on financial readiness for becoming involved in major projects. And so some of that work recommends, of course, dealing with the issue of distribution of wealth in advance of the project start. And I think that that's really key to do this. Of course, in many cases, we've learned this the hard way, and I think that there's some really great examples now across Canada of how those decisions are being made and in advance. It's still, you know, it's an issue. It's in some places, but I also know that for the most part, our communities are really, really tough on our leadership and making them accountable for the most part. And so I think that really helps, but I think having the communities involved in that discussion right at the beginning, once you've started to learn about a project and what what direction you want to take, I think it's important to decide how our revenues can be distributed or invested back into the business or other business development so that more jobs are created. So there's really good ways to do that. And I just want to suggest to everybody that we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we're doing a lot of these things. There's a lot of work that's being done. And again, a forum that would share these kinds of best practices will really help those who deal with the kinds of issues that have definitely plagued us because of the lack of information that we've received. And so it's very difficult sometimes to do things and set it up right the first way. But, I think the idea that we can learn from our mistakes is so important too. And some of the examples that we look at, we can see now what should have been done. And I think that's a huge learning lesson and a huge case study too. I know our board has looked at where there's been some issues, what could have sent it on the project on a different trajectory, to success.
Excuse me. Other comments or questions?
Listen to all the Listen to all the comments, it comes to my mind several of the problems or challenges that I think in Peru indigenous people are facing when they're trying to participate in, not in business because they have small business, art craft or handicraft. They sell medicinal plants, different clothes, traditional designs. They have this business, but very small ones. In the province, when they start to get engaged in a bigger business with bigger supply chains, and it came to my mind a recent case a fashion store, they very successful one, and they use designs, indigenous designs in their clothes. And a group of women started to complain about it. And they go to the government and to the media, saying that this company has stole the designs and they're stealing their business. Of course, from an Occidental perspective, you can imagine that they're stealing the business because it's not really competition, but they can join and negotiate with the company. And that is actually what the company started to do. When they realized that they had all this media attention, they were worried because that was not their intention. They actually approached another woman and asked her the permission for the design. They didn't thought that it was going to be a problem because they didn't have the knowledge that there was a traditional design. The thing is that the national legislation does not protect the ownership of that design. So the company actually was not doing anything wrong. And probably they knew that, but still they approached to the other woman, they paid something for the design, and they used it to do that. So I learned about this because the group of women, which is just a small group of women from this people, not the all women, they didn't have gathered together to decide which approach they will take to this company, which would be their strategy. They want the design out of the store, they want to share in the business, they want to receive attention, they want to receive recognition from their design. And there is also a national declaration, as a cultural patrimony, national cultural, material cultural patrimony of this design. But that declaration does not give any special protection, it's just a declaration. So they bring all these elements and they said, well, there is so in this, and they came to the government for help. And well, I was explaining that it was an opportunity to start draft legislation to protect this because there was no protection at all. But maybe they start approaching the company, and they told me that the company already approached, and they are offering the programs. And there were some of them, because there were several women's leaders there, and some of them, they said, we don't want to negotiate. Others mentioned that, well, we have to talk with other women from the whole community to decide. And they asked me what should they be doing. And I was telling them, well, because I'm in the government, I cannot tell you what to do if you can have, you should or you should not negotiate. That's something that you have to decide by yourself. I think it's a good idea to speak with the company and see what they are offered, and then you decide. Some of the women were disappointed about my response, because they wanted me to tell them what to do. So this is an ongoing thing. I don't know how this will end. From my perspective, but of course it's not the same as them, I think it will be a good opportunity for the women and the people to negotiate or define a program in their own terms with the company. And I think they probably would accept that. Right now, they recharge this close from the markets until this has been decided. So I think the challenge with this example, the challenge is something about process, being an entrepreneur. If you're an entrepreneur, probably you will see in this a business opportunity. If you are not, you want to protect your culture, and you think they are stolen, and from their perspective, they are stolen the design, because they were explaining that design is just like a geometrical design, but they were explaining that each line has a meaning in your culture. So they want recognition of that. Probably if they want just recognition, all companies are going to say this. In our conversation, something that came on the chair was telling them was to be careful, because if we regulate this, we put so many restrictions to companies for using this design, the reaction is going to be that they are not going to use it, because they can invent their own design. It's not the same as working with traditional knowledge associated with biodiversity, because there is a different value. Indigenous people have territory rich in biodiversity. If a company wants to do bioprospecting to find a compound for a medicine plant, of course you can say, no, you have a stronger negotiating tool. But for the size is a big difference. So my thought is what the governments can do in relation to that. We can help them to build a negotiation capacity, information about the market, but at the end of the day, they will have to decide if they want to be in business. And if they don't have enough understanding of the market opportunity and a decision inside the community or the people, what they want to do with their assets, we as government cannot do much. And in Peru, we're still at the beginning of that, helping to build the legislation. We have a lot of legislation, probably not as good as Colombia, but we have a lot of protection, rights to protect traditional knowledge. And then we see this and say, well, we have to draft another legislation, but we have to look at the market because we don't want to do the legislation that restrict the business opportunity based on one case, because that's what happened. There is this case, so now we're going to probably start to think about how to regulate this. Maybe we could regulate too much. And representative issues. This is just a group of women. They don't want, some of them, there were 4 of them, and they have different views. One didn't want to negotiate, the other one wanted to negotiate. They have their advisors. They were telling me that the company wants to set a program, but then they have to go back to the communities, and also the men probably are going to say something. And this is a particularly large people, indigenous people.
Sorry, Claudia, I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure I give Stefan, but you raised very interesting issues about intellectual property and following the community's vision and being the community being in the leadership role. I'd like to give Stefan time before we break for lunch on a Sami example of innovation and what the critical success factors were. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the previous statement and interventions. They were very interesting. About 100 years ago, some of the influenced Swedish citizens were hiking in high mountain in Sweden, and they realized that it was a wonderful landscape, and they wanted to preserve the landscape for coming generation, which was a good idea, of course, but it did not go that way in total. But we focus on the positive aspects. So the Swedish Parliament made several national parks in high mountain area for protection of the high mountains, grandiose views, or whatever it was. It was not involving indigenous peoples or our culture at that time. But time were passing and the values were shifting and changing. And in 1996, so the UNESCO established the formal world and cultural heritage of Laponia. And Laponia consisted of these protected areas, national park and also nature reserves. And they were at the borders to Norway and containing of the parts of Gällivare and Jokkmokk municipalities. But nothing happened because concerned Sami villages did not appreciate the involvement or the proposal of involvement. So after about 10 years of standstill, the current regional governor, Per-Ola Eriksson, took initiative, and it was established a management board. The board contains of representatives from the municipalities, from the regional government, from the environmental protection agency, state department, and also of under the chairmanship of a Sami person, and with representatives of the 9 local Sami villages, or the 9 Sami villages that have grazing rights in that area. or rights to travel there for and hunt and fish. Unfortunately, the only entity that are missing in this board are the Sami Parliament, but it will be fixed in due time. The management board represents an example for a valuable long-term and local acceptance to create an increasing amount of visitors at that area without destroying or harming the pristine nature or interfering in the reindeer husbandry in that area. So it has been very good. It is also to increase the knowledge for the visitors about the Sami culture and make it certain that the Sami culture within the national parks and protected area can be secured. It is, I will quote the decision, some of the lines in the decision from the UNESCO when it comes to why this area is so valuable for mankind, for all of us. And they wrote, among other stuff, they wrote this: the area is of outstanding universal value, and it shows examples of ongoing geological, biological, and ecological processes. A huge wealth of natural phenomena of exceptional beauty and significant biodiversity, including a population of brown bear and an alpine flora. The area has been inhabited by Sami from prehistoric times. It is one of the last and most undisputed, largest and most well-preserved examples in an area of nomadic groups with seasonal patterns involving summer grazing reindeer herds, which was widely spread once in a while and dating back to an early stage in human economic and social development. And we have a population of brown bear, but the people who were the reason that this was a cultural landscape was the Sami people. And I'm trying I'm going to quote the Swedish government note to the ESG committee within the UN system that what is the view of the Swedish government, that is that in Article 1 in 1966, both conventions of civil and political rights and economical and social and cultural rights, that Article 1 of the covenants are applicable on the Sami people, since they are indigenous and but seen in the context, these are applicable. That the Article 1 in the both conventions that all people have the right to self-determination. Of course, this is in line with both the Swedish government report to the ESG committee, and it also is showing why the Sami people exist in Sweden, are close contact to the nature. Without that, it would not have been any museum in Jokkmokk showing the Sami culture. Without our experience and our long traditions in developing and protecting the culture in remote areas, it has been beneficiary. The Laponia has now been more accessible for tourists without harming, as I said, and it's also beneficiary for non-indigenous entrepreneurs. They also have the need to use services in the municipalities, in the city center, and it can also be improved, this management board and how this society are developing acceptance and developing possibilities to accept tourists in a way that are suitable for the nature and the culture. Thank you.
Very interesting example. Are there any questions for Stefan? So before, I mean, really, really interesting and very diverse examples have been brought up that I have a whole bunch of common themes that have been drawn out that I would hope would then inform the discussion this afternoon and in the next day and a half. From all of them, from I'm starting with Jack on the feasibility issue, making sure that what you are trying to accomplish and what the vision is completely is clear and feasible. To be informed, bring in the expertise you need when you need it, whether it's local or from elsewhere. Have things community driven and lots of community involvement. And the example we just heard where the Sami seem to have taken charge of what was a national decision to protect an area, involve entrepreneurs, elders, and leaders. Building on the strengths of the community seems to be one thing that was common throughout, that whether it's cultural tourism, natural area preservation, or using the expertise of a tribe near an existing rail line, building on the strengths of the community on their own terms is critical. Knowing what you're measuring to know that it's a success, again, in the interesting example Stefan just brought up on knowing that it's been a success both for the Sami, but it seems to have been a success for spin-off businesses and opportunities for non-Sami in the area as well. So that thinking about spin-offs. Don brought up an interesting point that it's tough, it's difficult, knowing that it relates to the feasibility, knowing what you are expecting, but knowing that it's going to be a long road to get there, and you should be well aware at the beginning of any of these business opportunities that they are tough and that there are consequences of failure. I also like that all of them seem to, there was a very strong vision and thinking big in all these projects, not just in terms of what the project is, but what it could be in future phases. And I hope that when we do the case studies, that will be, it's not just about what a regional case study looks like, but what could a regional case study look like in the next 20 years? So Don was mentioning apps and chains of indigenous owned hotels and things. So what is the bigger picture? The replicability and building of networks is another theme that came out for me. The whole issue of being in line with recognized rights, and how do you ensure that you leverage international conventions, national processes, national constitutions, etc., to be a lever in making the projects a reality. None of these projects, there's no one size fits all. Customizing the idea of adapting your process and your content as you develop a project. I was very interested to hear that there are 800 reserves in Colombia. There's 650 or so First Nation bands in Canada, far more parcels of reserve land, so there's some similarity there, but certainly no one size fits all. Open communication and involvement. Interesting, everybody mentioned different levels of government. Obviously something critical in Canada and our federation, having federal government and provincial or territorial, as well as several people mentioned local municipalities and councils. And then the issue that Flavia brought up from Peru, the intellectual property and having ownership, I think is something we should keep in consideration. Then just two other comments. There are obviously very different types of projects that we could be thinking about in the scope of where these case studies go. Some, in the Iron Horse example that Jack brought up, these are seizing opportunities that are sitting there, sort of, where there's an opportunity, there's some infrastructure, there's a history of a rail line there, it's a business opportunity where the Indian tribe in the United States got organized to seize that business opportunity. A little bit in the example Stefan gave, the same thing. There was an opportunity there because somebody had recognized that the mountains were going to be protected in Sweden. In the case of Dawn, it's a very, very different case where it was creating the opportunity. So should we be differentiating as we move forward between regional economic development where you are seizing on perhaps an existing or somebody else's opportunity versus economic development that is created entirely from within the community? Because I think they're two very different scenarios. Anyway, just some of my thoughts to keep in mind. Before we break for lunch, does anybody have any closing comments or observations from what we've heard in this session, but as well as what we've heard throughout the morning? Don?
Yeah, I was just going to say that cultural misappropriation issue was pretty interesting, and of course that's been a concern I've heard for decades, and I don't know of anyone who's taken that on in a strong way to make sure that that is addressed, because it still happens even in well, it still happens. And I think that it would be good to see where it might be working. I don't know if in Colombia, when you talk about some examples, I'm not too sure if there's places that have good laws in place to do that kind of protection. But I think that should be something that this forum looks at as well.
Thank you. Any other comments before we break for lunch? So lunch. Yes. María.
Sí, en respuesta al planteamiento de Don, hasta donde yo entiendo en Panamá, hay, por lo menos para el caso de los indígenas cuna, hay reglamentación frente a la protección de los vecinos. En Colombia todavía no hemos llegado a ese estadio, pero entiendo que se está construyendo el Ministerio del Interior una reglamentación sobre protección de la propiedad intelectual, que todavía no está pues formalizado, pero sí se está trabajando.
Very interesting.
In Peru, we have the protection for traditional knowledge associated with biological resources, not with cultural expressions. But this is a good example of prior informed consent before you use traditional knowledge.
Thank you very much. So certainly the cultural appropriateness, cultural appropriation, intellectual property, I would imagine will be woven throughout the, or will be part of the criteria looking at what case studies. So we break in from now until 2:30. Lunch is served on the basement, on the ground floor, at the restaurant there. So I assume everybody has handed in their meal cards. Yeah. Okay, great. We can be back here at 2:30. Is that right?
Sure.
Good. Yeah. See. Thank you. Very good discussion this morning.